Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. Looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 556. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about waterfalls and beautiful tropical birds, cathedrals, markets, and lots of hikes as we go to Loja and Southern Ecuador. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. We have some interesting news in the community section after the interview today, so stay tuned for where you might just run into the Amateur Traveler while you're on an airline. But first, let's talk about Ecuador. I'd like to welcome to the show Lily Ann Fouts from lilyannfouts.com, coincidentally, who's come to talk to us about Southern Ecuador. Lily, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And so I talked about Southern Ecuador. We're really going to focus in predominantly on one particular province in Southern Ecuador, which is Loja.
Yes.
And I would say, can we put that on a map? I think most people could probably find Ecuador if you follow the equator. It goes through the country, coincidentally enough.
Yes, Ecuador is actually the word for equator in Spanish, and it is on the equator. Loja is in the southern part of Ecuador, and the province borders Peru to the south, so it's all the way down there. And then the coastal region of El Oro province is to the west. And then to the east, Zamora Chinchipe province, the Amazon region on the east side. So Loja's right there in the middle.
And I don't know that everybody knows that Ecuador has an Amazon region, so that was interesting that you mentioned that. But why are we heading down to this portion of Ecuador?
Well, it's beautiful. And it's a wonderful destination for people who are into hiking and bird watching. And Loja itself, the city of Loja, is considered the cultural capital of Ecuador. So there's a lot of music and arts going on there. So it's a wonderful destination for people who are interested in arts and the natural world.
Excellent. And what kind of itinerary would you recommend for people heading down to Loja and the region?
if you're going to be there for a week, I would recommend you base yourself in Loja and then take day trips, because some of the destinations I'm talking about are all directions, north, south, east, west from Loja, and you can do most of the things I'm suggesting in a day trip. So I would suggest getting yourself based in Loja, get a week long hotel or Airbnb, and then make trips out from there. So there are several things I'll discuss that you can do inside of the city of Loja and in the immediate surrounding region. And then the day trips I'm going to recommend are El Cisne, which is a little town west and north of Loja, Vilcabamba, which is due south of Loja, and Zamora, which is east of Loja. And then there's another town called Saraguro, which I would actually recommend. You could do it in a day trip, but I would recommend spending a night there with an indigenous family. And I'll touch on Cuenca a little bit. Cuenca is a larger and more famous city, which is north of Loja. And if you want to extend your trip either before or after Loja, Cuenca is a really nice place to see. And you might schedule your Saraguro visit on the way to or from Cuenca because it's right in between those two cities. Another recommendation I would say, if you want to extend your trip and you're really into hiking and outdoors, there's a county in the southern region of the province which takes about 4 hours to get to, and it is absolutely stunning for the person who wants untouched, pristine, beautiful wilderness, bird watching, hiking, and all of that kind of thing. I'll talk about that a little bit.
Okay. And you mentioned extend your trip, and Lily has also written a book on how to be an expat in the area, which we'll talk about later. But this is Amateur Traveler, so we're talking about an itinerary and specifically how to spend a week in this portion of Ecuador. So you started us out in the city itself. What are we going to see in Loja?
Loja is, like I mentioned, a great artistic destination, especially for music. The city of Loja is kind of the cradle of artists in the country. A lot of the country's most famous musicians and novelists and so forth have come from that city. So I would definitely recommend, there's a weekly program there that is just amazing, a fantastic 2 hour long production every single Thursday night called Jueves Culturales, Cultural Thursday. And it's music and dance every Thursday night in the central part of the historic part of town in this Plaza San Sebastian. So I would definitely recommend time your trip so you can be in Loja on a Thursday and watch that.
And are we seeing traditional music and dance, or?
It is a mix.
Okay.
We see people coming up doing traditional dances from all regions of the country.
Okay.
You see everything from that all the way up to modern dance where they're, hip hop and street dance. And
okay.
It's just a wild, eclectic mix. A lot of local artists, dancers, and musicians, and as well as local, they also have visitors coming in from other parts of the country to perform. And it's amazing that a city the size of Loja, which is less than 200,000 people, has a production of this quality every single week. It's televised, it's broadcast on radio, and it's really quite a production.
Excellent. What else are we doing in Loja?
Loja has some cathedrals, some museums. It's a lesser known destination, so a lot of the information that you're going to see in Loja is going to be in Spanish.
Sure.
So, the signs in the museums and so forth, for the most part, have not been translated to English yet. I think that we'll see some changes in that in the near future because they're really actively changing that right now.
So it might be good to either brush up on our Spanish or make sure we have a data plan so we can use Google Translate or something so we can understand the signs. Good to know.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
And you say some cathedrals. I'm guessing it has one and only one cathedral, because only one church in town would be a cathedral unless there's something other than a Roman Catholic one there, because that would be the Church of the Bishop. So, okay.
You're correct. Yeah, one cathedral and then a number of other churches in this historic center.
Mm-hmm. Are we going to the main cathedral there or to some of the churches? You mentioned them. Are there some ones that you would recommend we see?
The biggest cathedral is in the city center, and it's in the Plaza Central, Central Plaza, and it is one of the largest churches in Ecuador. It is The place every year in August, they have a pilgrimage, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, but they bring the Virgin
Hmm.
of El Cisne, which is kind of the virgin of the area, to the church every August in a great big pilgrimage. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we go to El Cisne. That's one of the churches. I mentioned Jueves Culturales in the Plaza San Sebastián, and there is a church there as well in Plaza San Sebastián, which is beautiful. There's another one called Iglesia Santo Domingo.
And we're talking about churches from, I think most of these that I'm saying are from the 1500s, except San Sebastian, I think, is from the 1600s. So older churches from the colonial time periods.
Yes,
Hmm.
these are all in the historic center of town. And then there's another smaller one called Iglesia San Francisco.
Okay.
So those are some of the churches that you might want to see if you enjoy doing that. And then, as well as the churches, there are some museums that you might be interested in seeing. Right in the central plaza, the same area where the cathedral is, there is El Museo de la Cultura Lojana, which is a museum of Lojano culture. And there are 7 different rooms in that museum that just kind of give you different aspects of Loja, the nature around Loja, the history of Loja, the traditions, and so forth. There's a museum of archaeology at the university, Universidad Particular Técnica de Loja, UTPL.
Oh, so there's a technical university in
Yes, a
Loja.
technical
Okay.
university, and there's also the second oldest university in the country, the University, National University of Loja, Universidad Nacional de Loja.
Hmm.
2 very good universities there in Loja. So yes, you can go to the Museum of Archaeology. Loja is also the birthplace of Matilde Hidalgo de Procel, who was born in 1889. She's the first woman to graduate from high school in Ecuador, the first woman to vote in Latin America, the
Hmm.
first woman to hold an elected office in Ecuador, and the first woman to become a medical doctor in Ecuador. So
Although not necessarily in that order, I'm guessing.
I don't think it was in that order,
Okay.
but yes, a lot of firsts there. And she was born in Loja. And so there's a museum about her in
Hmm.
the city. And there's a museum of music that has musical instruments on display, information again in Spanish about the musicians that came from that area, musical scores, all kinds of music related stuff for any music geeks out there. They might enjoy going to that museum.
My impression is we're talking about relatively small museums. We're not going to be spending like a whole day in any of these, so we could hit multiple of these on that Thursday that we're spending in town, for instance.
Yes, you could hit several museums in one day very easily. As far as huge museums, that sort of thing, you're not going to find that in Loja. Loja is a smaller city, and you'll be able to see most of the main attractions within a few days. And yeah, you could probably hit all or most of the museums in a day.
Okay. Well, and I know you're anxious to get us out of town to some of these side trips you have in mind. Places to eat or stay you would recommend before we do that.
For places to eat, there are a few. If you want to try the traditional local foods, the most recommended and common restaurant there is Mama Lola, and they serve the kinds of foods that are traditionally made there in the region. One of the things, which isn't specific to Loja, but in parts of Peru and so forth, that region of Latin America is cuy, which
Hmm.
is guinea
Guinea
pig.
pig.
They serve that there. They also have a particular dish that is local to Loja called gallina cuyada, which is basically chicken which has been made in the juices and with the same spices that they use to make the cuy. And so the chicken takes on the flavor of the cuy. So for people who might not want to eat the guinea pig, then you might maybe try the gallina cuyada and eat the chicken and get a little bit of the cuy flavor. I personally am vegetarian, so I've never had it, but everybody talks about it. You'll always be asked if you've had it. So that's something you might want to try if you do eat meat.
Hmm.
For the vegetarians out there, there's a soup there in Loja, which is called repe blanco. It's a creamy white soup
Hmm.
with a base of green bananas or plantains,
Okay.
and it's delicious. I would highly recommend Repe Blanco. So Mama Lola is one restaurant. There's another one. One of the landmarks you'll see in town up on the hill, there's this thing that looks like a castle. It is actually an unfinished aerial tram, like the top half of the tram.
Okay.
And then the bottom half is down in this park. There's no cable between them. I guess they ran out of funds while they were building it. And there's talk off and on of finishing it, but it hasn't happened yet. But the bottom half of the tram is in this park called Parque Pucará. And in this same park, there's a restaurant called Pucará del Podocarpus. And that restaurant also serves traditional local meals. And it's a great place to sit and look out over the city because it's up the hill a little ways, so you get some nice views while you're eating. And there's one other place in town called Tamal Lojano, and they also serve some traditional things. So I would recommend those three places for eating. You asked about places to stay. There are a range of hotels in town. I am an Airbnb person myself, and I enjoy staying in an Airbnb apartment usually because you get to stay in a neighborhood. You have regular locals for neighbors, and there's a lot more interaction with the locals. As far as hotels, you can go to any major hotels.com or booking.com, whatever site you like to use, and find a number of different options in Loja.
Okay. Oh, one question. You mentioned the blanco soup, the soup that had the plantains at the bottom. So that kind of begs the question of if you're in a place that has plantains, what kind of climate are we in? We're not in the Amazon basin and we're not at the coast. We're kind of in between.
Yes, we are in the Andes Mountains, and it's actually up at around 7,000 feet.
Okay.
But there are banana plantations not in, right around the city of Loja. Well, actually, you do see bananas growing in Loja as well, but the really big plantations mostly on the coast. But there are banana plantations in the province.
Okay. Well, and we're equatorial, so the weather is going to be relatively similar all year round. Best time to go?
Yes, you're correct. The weather is relatively stable year round, 60s to 70s most of the time during the day. There is a brief cold spell. And when I say cold, it like gets down into the 40s at night, but it never freezes. Since they don't have indoor heating, it can feel pretty cold.
Okay.
Just a couple of weeks around June and July, they can have a cold spell. There are wetter times, there are drier times, but the way Loja is that even during the so-called rainy season, most of the days you'll at least see a few minutes of sun. And even during the so-called dry season, it rains very often. Loja is very green because of all the rain they get. I always tell people when you're in Loja, take a rain jacket and an umbrella and keep it with you. Even if you leave your hotel or your apartment and it's beautiful and sunny outside, the weather in the mountains can change very quickly. And it can go from sunny to rainy in a matter of a few minutes. And then it'd be sunny again a few minutes after that. So just be prepared for rain because it does rain a lot in Loja.
Well, and what I was seeing is about 35 inches or 892 centimeters of rain a year, relatively spread out. The rainiest month being March with almost 5 inches, and the least rainy September and August with like 1.8. It's not like a great range between the two there. So, okay.
No, not
Excellent.
at all. Not at all.
Well, let's get out of town then. Where are we going?
All right. Well, if you want to head around the edges of town, if you're somebody who loves birds and loves hiking, right close to Loja, you have Podocarpus National Park. And that is a beautiful, very large national park with a huge range of biodiversity. 560 species of birds, 46 species of mammals. It starts down in the Amazon basin and goes all the way up to the Andes Mountains in Loja. So you've got a big elevation change, just a tremendous amount of diversity in that park. So the Loja entrance is actually probably one of the hardest to get to because you have to go about 6 kilometers up this dirt road to get to the trailhead, but you can take a taxi up there. And there's some beautiful trails to hike in the Loja part, wonderful bird watching. There's some short loops for the people who like shorter hikes. There's another longer loop that could take a few hours to do that takes you all the way up to the ridge where you get amazing views of the whole valley on the Loja side and then looking south all the way down to the Vilcabamba area, which we'll talk about too.
And most interesting birds you've seen there?
Oh, goodness. I love watching birds, but I'm not really good at names of birds.
Okay.
So you put me on the spot there.
I'm assuming we're talking more rainforest birds, and so we're into the parrots and what's the other one?
If you go down to the Zamora entrance, which is on the Amazon side, then you're going to see a lot of those kinds of birds, parrots and tropical birds. Up in the
Here we're
Loja
more
area,
cloud forest then.
exactly, higher
Okay.
elevation, you're going to see not so many. I mean, I think they still have them. I never saw any up there. I saw some parrots in the Zamora entrance, but I never saw any in the Loja entrance. And there is a beautiful bird up there. I just cannot remember the name of it. I have a picture of it.
What color is it?
It is multicolored. It's got a green back, red chest, white band around the neck.
Okay.
I should stay in the city of Loja, in the town, just a little bit longer because I forgot to mention the parks.
Okay.
There are a few parks in Loja. Again, for somebody who likes to bird watch and somebody who likes to go walking and somebody who likes to interact with the locals, the parks are great, especially if you can hit them on a weekend, Saturday or Sunday. The biggest one is called Parque Hipiro, and Hipiro has on the weekends all kinds of activities you can do. They have paddle boats, they have horseback riding, you can rent electric bikes there and use those to explore. People come out there with their families on the weekends, and it's just a super active place. It's really fun, and if you want to go during the week, you'll probably see more birds and it's a little quieter. But from that park, there's a trail that goes north of the park all the way up. You can follow it all the way to the edge of town and beyond. So if you like to go walking, there's a nice path on either side. There's a river that goes there, and you can take the path up one side and come back on the other side of the river. And then on the southern end of town, there's another park called Parque La Tebaida. And La Tebaida has another, again, a river, the Malacatos River, with a trail on either side of it. And you can kind of make a loop however long you want, just depending on which bridge you cross and come back on. So those are some really nice places to walk, to interact with the locals, and just see people out having fun with their families.
Well, and I was completely unsuccessful trying to find the name of a colorful bird in Ecuador because they're all colorful. So, although the best named bird has got to be the whooping marmot, but I can't tell you what you were talking about.
Yeah. There was a motmot that I saw in the Vilcabamba area, and I can't remember that, there's several different types of motmots.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember which specific one this one was. If I went back through my blog posts or something, I would be able to find it. But like you said, they're all colorful. The bird watching is incredible in that part of the country. And I would probably be out there bird watching and taking notes and spending a lot more time on that. But my husband is not an avid bird watcher, and he gets bored. So I find myself not stopping, taking time to look things up like I would if I was by myself or with a group of other bird watchers.
Okay.
All right, let's leave town a little bit. One of the trips I would recommend, a day trip from Loja, is to the town of El Cisne. And El Cisne is kind of a special place for Lojanos because there's a huge sanctuary up there, Santuario del Cisne. And that is where La Virgen del Cisne lives, the Virgin of El Cisne.
Mm-hmm.
And the Virgin of El Cisne is very important in that area. She's like the Virgin of the province. And people come in August from all over the country and even from neighboring countries, hundreds of thousands of people, for a pilgrimage from El Cisne through the mountains and down to Loja. It's a 71-kilometer pilgrimage over a period of 3 days. And it has significance for that. And obviously, if you were there in August, I believe it's August 17th through 20, you could take part in the pilgrimage. Or if you just want to go see El Cisne, you can go there. And it's this huge cathedral just dominates this little tiny town. It's this big powder blue cathedral. And you can go in there and see the Virgen del Cisne. And then there's a museum next door where they have all kinds of traditional clothing and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Museums in the Loja area are typically either free or $1 or $2 to get into. It's very, very cheap.
Okay.
And you can also, there's another little room adjacent to the church where you can go in and see all these gifts that people have made for the Virgin.
And when we say we're seeing the Virgin, we're seeing a 6-foot-tall statue of Mary, which is what they carry during the procession, as you mentioned, from El Cisne down to Loja. Okay.
Yes.
You may see the Virgin other than the statue. We'll leave that up to you and your personal faith there. But what we can guarantee is that you'll see the statue.
Yeah, and she's very significant to the people that area. You know, they're very devout Catholics, and they take their faith very seriously. So that's one trip. It could be a half a day to a day. It's about an hour and a half by bus from Loja to El Cisne.
Mm-hmm.
And another trip you can take is from Loja to Vilcabamba, which is an hour south. And beautiful trip. And then Vilcabamba is very famous as an expat town. I mean, there's a huge expat population there, international people from around the world. And unlike most other parts of Loja, the province, you will hear lots of English being spoken in Vilcabamba. You will not have any trouble getting around in Vilcabamba because there are so many foreigners who live there. And English is kind of the language of the business there. Vilcabamba is a really good place for restaurants if you want to go eat. You know, if you're tired of the traditional local food and you want to eat something ethnic from around the world, there are lots of options to choose from, lots of vegan and vegetarian places. It's got a very new age type vibe. If you want to get a massage or do some yoga or something like that, that's always an option in Vilcabamba. And it's also another beautiful place to go hiking. There's a place on the edge of town called Rumi Wilco, which is a nature reserve.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing bird watching and trails that will take you up to the ridge where you can look out over the valley. There's another entrance to Podocarpus National Park also in Vilcabamba. So you can go there. There's a waterfall that you can hike to from the Vilcabamba entrance. So again, really nice hiking, good restaurants, pleasant little place to spend, half a day to a day.
Okay.
And then the other trip that I would recommend is actually we're going to go outside of the province of Loja, but it's very close, down into the Amazon region. So we're going to go east from Loja, about 90 minutes to the town of Zamora.
Okay.
From Zamora, you can also enter the national park, Podocarpus National Park, and that entrance, you're going to have, it's a lot more hot and humid. You're going to see a lot more tropical plants. You're in the jungle and tropical birds. It's a nice place. Take the bus down early in the morning and pack a lunch, pack your binoculars, and just spend the day walking around all the little trails there. There's one that goes up to a lookout point. There's one that goes to a beautiful waterfall. There's one that follows the river for a while. There's one that goes down to a swimming hole. Just really nice places. Lots of butterflies and orchids and just beautiful. So I would highly recommend that. For somebody who's really a big birding enthusiast, I would say you might want to spend even more than one day down there. Stay overnight at this little place called Copalinga. And it is basically this little eco lodge geared toward birders. They have things set up, bird feeders and things to attract birds to come in. They serve breakfast and...
To the people, not the birds.
Right. They serve breakfast to the people who are staying there.
Okay. Maybe also to the birds, but...
Yes, birds and people alike. Everybody gets fed. They also will pack a lunch for you if you order it ahead of time. And they also prepare suppers for you if you order them ahead of time. And they can accommodate any kind of dietary needs or whatever. I've toured the property. I haven't actually stayed there, but I've toured the property and it's really beautiful. I definitely plan to stay there in the future. Okay. So Yes, that would be a great place if you want to stay overnight and do some more bird watching, because a lot of times some of the best bird watching is early in the morning or late in the evening.
Sure.
So that's Zamora. The other thing in the province of Loja is the little town of Saraguro, which is north.
Hmm.
And like I said, you can do Saraguro on a day trip if you want to just see the town. But to me, the really special thing about Saraguro is their tourism program. And they have this community tourism program where people can stay with the indigenous families for 24 hours and see what their traditional way of life is, eat with them, do activities with them. And it's very reasonable, like $35 per person for a 24-hour period, includes your lodging, includes all your meals, transportation to and from the family, and activities with the family for 24 hours. And it's just a really neat way to see how this group of indigenous people lives. So I would recommend doing that for sure.
Okay.
And as I mentioned earlier, Saraguro, you can either make it a trip from Loja and then go back, or if you want to do Cuenca, plan to stay in Saraguro on the way to or from Cuenca.
And why would we do Cuenca?
Cuenca is a UNESCO World Heritage City. It is a beautiful city, colonial architecture, rich history. Again, it's a little bit higher than Loja, actually. So it's in the Andes region.
Mm-hmm.
And Loja is the cultural capital of Ecuador,
Mm-hmm.
but it's small. Cuenca is much larger. So they also have a lot of cultural activities, and they happen more often just because it's a bigger city. So there's always something going on there. It's got a huge expat population because it's so popular that many people have actually moved there from around the world. And as such, you'll be able to get by much more easily in English
Mm-hmm.
in Cuenca, although I highly recommend anybody traveling to that part of the world, even if you are in a city like Vilcabamba or Cuenca, at least learn a few phrases of Spanish and use them, because that will endear you to the locals if you're speaking to them in their own language.
Sí, por supuesto.
Yes. Check out the architecture. One of the things that I did, we had less time in Cuenca, obviously, than in Loja. We took the tour bus. Loja has a tour bus too, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But we took the tour bus, those double-decker ones,
Yep.
and we just got a really good overview of the city that way. And then from there, we decided which things we wanted to see in more depth. And one of the things that we chose, and I highly recommend, El Museo del Banco Central del Ecuador, which is a big, beautiful museum.
About the Central Bank?
Yes, the Central Bank of Ecuador.
Okay.
There's a whole huge display in there on the money. Ecuador uses the US dollar, and they changed in the year 2000 from the sucre.
I did not realize that.
But yes, they use the US dollar. And so there's a whole thing in there about Ecuador's economy and finances and that sort of thing. And as I recall, the signs in there are also in English.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a much easier one to visit than some of the Loja museums. And then on the outside of that museum, there are some ruins that you can see, the Tomebamba ruins. So you get to see that, and they've got this vegetable garden that they recreated with like the traditional vegetables that they grew. They have alpacas, and they have this giant outdoor aviary with some of the birds from the region and so forth. So it's just a really fun place to go out, walk around, and explore. And it's all free.
Hmm.
It's definitely worth seeing.
And when you say Tomebamba ruins, it looks like this was almost a second capital for the Inca. Am I getting that right? And predates the Inca as well.
Yes.
Okay.
The other thing that you might want to see in the Cuenca area, there's another national park up there. It's high in elevation, so be sure to take an extra layer, but it's called El Cajas National Park. And I didn't actually make it there myself. We were planning on it, but I got sick while we were staying in Cuenca, so I missed out on some things. But I have heard nothing but good things about El Cajas National Park, so definitely go see that if you're in the Cuenca area. I would say if you're spending a week in Loja, you want to extend your trip, Cuenca is well worth going to see. Another possible trip extension would be for people who love nature. They want to go to those places that very few people go.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Yacuri National Park way down by the Peruvian border.
Yeah.
I would highly recommend this park. It gets a total of about 1,500 visitors per year.
Wow. Okay.
So it's very pristine. Very few people go up there, and almost none of the people that go up there are foreigners. Most of the tourists they do get are other Ecuadorians. So it's definitely kind of on the frontier. If you're the kind of person who loves that, you do not want to miss Yacuri National Park. And on the way to Yacuri, you'll go to Amalusa. You might want to stay overnight in Amalusa. And in Amalusa, there's this waterfall called Cascada La Cofradía, and it is amazing. So we were down there, we saw this national park, and we decided, this is such a beautiful area. The area is, the weather and everything is similar to Vilcabamba. It's a little warmer than the city of Loja.
Uh-huh.
And the people there are very friendly and so forth. And it kind of made me think this must be what Vilcabamba was like 30 years ago before all the expats came in. It's still
Sure.
untouched, still very local and traditional, but just that really beautiful location, beautiful setting. So we went to this waterfall with this guy who basically he took it upon himself to be our guide and took us out there. He's like, "Oh, you got to see this waterfall." I'm thinking, "Oh, it's going to be this cute little waterfall." It is a big, thundering, just huge, amazing waterfall. This thing in the States would be a national park, and here it is just out past some farms here in Amalusa. So that blew me away. It was incredible.
And back up here a bit, because you're describing something that I'm not sure that everybody has experienced. You said this guy took it upon himself to become our guide. And you said that as if that were a normal thing. But I'm not sure that everyone has experienced this. How did this come about?
So this guy actually lives in Amalusa, and he's sort of like the guy that works with the tourism industry on a very loose level. I mean, there is no tourist infrastructure in Amalusa, but somehow he ended up being the guy that the tourism people connect with. We went with this group called Loja Aventura, which is Loja Adventure Group,
Okay.
to Yacuri National Park. And this man, his name is Arcesio, who lives in Amalusa, helped us get to Yacuri National Park. And the rest of the group from Loja Aventura went back to Loja, but my husband and I, Keith and I decided we wanted to explore the area a little bit more. So we just decided to stay. And he said, "Oh, well, if you're going to stay, I'm going to show you this waterfall. You have to see it." So that's kind of how he ended up becoming our guide. And it was really funny because I thought, well, is he going to want us to pay him something? Or, we're kind of thinking he wants something in exchange for this. And he took us out in his car. He spent a good chunk of the day with us. And after everything, he absolutely refused to let us give him anything. Finally, we convinced him to let us at least take him out for lunch. But he was just happy to show us his area. He was just thrilled. And he wants people to come and see, what his town has. And he was just thrilled that we were there. He does a little bit of television work, and he had his camera with him while we were out hiking, and he's videoing us and asking us questions about what do we think of the experience. He was just so proud that we were out there.
Well, and I will put a link into the blog post that you did on this, which I found while you were talking, because if I look on the internet for Amalusa and waterfall, it's pretty much the only thing I found. So, as you say, not a lot of people have been there. So very quickly, I was looking at a picture of you holding a Loja Adventura banner, and so realized that I was, in fact, looking at the experience you were talking about.
Yes, that is the experience.
Any other destinations we want to add in before we get to our wrap-up questions?
I think we've kind of hit it.
It sounds like we have.
Yeah, I mean, the ones that I really wanted to get to, for Loja, the really special thing is just the people there are so friendly, just getting out, interacting with the locals as much as possible. That's why I recommend getting an Airbnb if you can, because it forces you to be out there in the neighborhoods and, try to communicate with people, learn about them, be friendly. If you don't speak Spanish at all, try to pick up a few phrases before you go down there. Just be really friendly and respectful, and I think you're going to have a wonderful time. And one of the things I like to do is hop on one of the city buses. They're 30 cents a ride,
Uh-huh.
and just take a city bus to the end of the line. In most cases, the end of the line is kind of on the edge of town, and you can get off the bus and just go hiking in any direction. And it is so beautiful. It's incredible. You're up there. You take a bus to the edge of town, and in almost every case, you're going to go up the mountain in some direction, up the hill or up the mountain in some direction. You've got amazing views of the city, and people in those outlying neighborhoods, some of them are just really friendly and love to come up and just ask you questions and talk to you. So I would highly recommend just get the local experience as much as you can while you're there, because that's one of the things that makes Loja special.
Okay. Finishing up with some of our 4 typical questions. I know you listen to the show, so you're ready for this. You're standing in the prettiest spot. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
I would have to say you are standing at the base of Cascada La Cofradia in Amalusa, and just feeling the incredible, the spray and the wind coming off from that waterfall. You just can't help but, woo! It's just it's just a rush, and it's so beautiful. On the way there, it's a beautiful hike all the way there, with the orchids and tropical fruit trees and birds and butterflies. And then you get to the waterfall, and it's just like the cherry on top. It is so beautiful. I'm going to cheat, though. I'm going to give 2 prettiest spots, because
Well, you threw in a woo, so I figure you get to have 2 if you throw in a woo.
Okay, so Cascada La Cofradia is the prettiest spot in the province, I would say. But I'm also going to give you a prettiest spot in the city.
Okay.
And this is actually not right inside the city, but it's overlooking the city of Loja. And that is up in Podocarpus National Park, getting up on the trail that takes you up to the ridge, where you get that full view of the valley.
Okay.
It is so gorgeous. So that's my top one for the city of Loja.
And it will be easy for people to tell which trail you're talking about when they get to town?
Yeah, when you go into the Loja entrance, the trailhead, there are a couple of short trails, and there's a long trail. You want the long trail.
Got it. Okay. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Loja, only in Southern Ecuador.
When you shop at the market and the shopkeepers are quoting you the same price as they quote the locals, they're not trying to rip you off. And then after you buy the thing and pay for it, they throw in something extra for free. That happened to me several times in Loja.
That is a very different experience than some of the places I have traveled recently.
Yeah. I mean, you don't expect that in Latin America. You expect to get ripped off. And don't get me wrong, there are people down, especially in the areas where a lot of expats are, like in Vilcabamba, where they will try to rip you off.
Well, when you say rip off here, we're talking about sometimes you're just talking about the tourist tax, the unofficial tax on being a tourist and not being a local. And that happens all over the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, it happens all over. But, and Loja is like one of the only places I've been where people are not only honest, but very generous. And it happened multiple times. It wasn't just once, where, we're in the market. When we first went down there, I thought, oh, for sure they're going to quote us a higher price than the locals, because we don't look like locals.
Uh-huh.
But they didn't.
I find you are more likely to run into that in whatever country I've been in when you are going where the locals shop. When you are acting like a local, you will be more likely to be treated like a local. So I'm not too surprised by that you'd be more likely to get in Loja, for instance. Excellent. Finish this thought. You really know you're in Loja, Ecuador when what?
When you can go to a 2-hour-long, top-quality production every Thursday night and see incredible talent.
Okay. And is that free, or is there a charge for that? We didn't talk about that.
Absolutely free.
So you left off the best part of that. Okay, excellent.
Yes. Oh, you know what else I left off? Loja has a symphony orchestra.
Okay.
They are very good, and they are also free.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they play almost every week. So if you're there and you can catch a symphony orchestra performance, do go, because it's very, unless they're pairing up with some other thing and putting on some different type of production.
Yeah.
If they're doing their own thing, it's free.
Excellent. And finally, if you had to summarize Loja, Ecuador, and the region in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Happy.
Okay.
Green.
Okay.
And musical.
Interesting. Okay. Excellent. And Lily, where can people read more about your travel writing, first of all?
My website, lilyannfouts.com. I've actually created a post called 33 Things to Do in Loja, and it has a number of the things that we talked about here in this show, as well as other things that you can do in the area. And it has links to a number of my other posts from the region. So, for example, Zamora and Amalusa and so forth are linked in that post. And Cuenca. So that's a really good one if people want to learn more about Loja.
Excellent. We'll link to that. And then you have also written a book we mentioned on Loja.
I have written a book. It's called Live Like a Local in Loja. There is a lot of information similar to what I've been talking about here in this podcast, as well as for people who are thinking about moving to Loja, because there is some interest in that. So the book kind of touches on that as well. But there's just lots of stories and information about Loja, really helpful to have if you're going to be traveling down there. Yes, it's called Live Like a Local in Loja.
Okay, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well.
Yes, and for your listeners, if they are interested in getting that book, I will create a special page on my site, lilyannfouts.com/AT podcast for Amateur Traveler Podcast. And I will put a special code in there so that your listeners can get the book at a discount.
Thank you very much. And we should say that Lily wrote the book somewhat in self-defense because she was getting asked so many questions about living in that it was easier to write a book than it was to spend all the time asking the questions. So Lily, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing with us your love for Ecuador and your love for Loja.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
In news of the community, I mentioned there was some interesting news, interesting to me at least. If you're flying the airline Inter-Caribbean sometime here in the next couple months and you check out their audio entertainment system, you may find 4 episodes of The Amateur Traveler on there. I've started working with an agent who has sold them into the airline and is looking at making sales to other airlines as well. So take a look at your audio entertainment and see if they have Amateur Traveler next time you're on a flight. And of course, if they don't, you might suggest something. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. Join the mailing list to find out what's going to happen in The Amateur Traveler. I'm traveling quite a lot for the next months, so it might be useful to be on the mailing list to find out the news. And thanks so much for listening.
One more cathedral, I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but baby now